I am Jason Burgos for Sportsnaut.com. I'm joined by an elite level expert when it comes to the quarterbacks in Crissy Froyd. She's here to talk about Wake Forest QB Sam Hartman. Crissy, what did Hartman do for Wake last year, and how did his stock rise or maybe fall through that season?
Yeah, I think he's a true dual threat quarterback who, especially in that first stretch of the season, whenever he kept that team undefeated for so long, was able to do things for this team in every single aspect of the game. He posted a lot of really high numbers. He was a guy who really popped on the stat sheet to the point to where we weren't talking a lot about him ahead of the season, but I'd say by midseason he certainly couldn't be ignored. And then we kind of hit this weird stretch in the back half of the season where we didn't see quite as much consistency. Some games his numbers started to fall, and I think we saw some decision making issues, some turnover heavy games in general for him, and especially whenever it came down to the title game against Pittsburgh, really had some turnover issues there. So I feel like Sam Hartman kind of rose and really hit a peak there where he was being considered a quarterback to possibly watch in the 2022 NFL draft, maybe a quarterback who could be one of the top in the nation, and then kind of lost momentum there down that final stretch.
And give me a little more, because you kind of answered a little bit. That was my next question, but you mentioned the title game and stuff like that against Pittsburgh. How much, like specifics of that game, would you say factored into how his draft stock?
Yeah, you had those two interceptions that came really close to each other, and it seemed like he got into this rut that he just couldn't pick himself up out of. And it only seemed to get worse as the game went on. And I think you could kind of see him lose some confidence there and to, I guess, perform somewhat poorly on such a high stage, especially when you're sitting on a sideline right across from Kenny Pickett, who is a first round quarterback, the only first round quarterback of this draft. I think it just kind of made him look bad. And it just was a reflection that he wasn't quite ready to go for this draft at least, but I think that he can kind of build this year. He needs to just find his footing again. We've seen the ceiling of what Sam Hartman can be. I think he can still be a really good quarterback. I think he just needs to settle in on some things.
And I mean, it's tough to go head to head with a contemporary that's in the draft and not do well. You kind of mentioned a little bit of what he needs to do. Give me a little bit more depth on what he needs to do to make his stock rise to a level of a Kenny Pickett or even the Malik Willis going into the next draft.
He's got a lot of exciting things, right? I mean, a quarterback who is a true dual threat in this era is actually a lot harder to find than people think it is. So, I mean, we have quarterbacks who are good passers who can run, and then we have quarterbacks who are kind of classified as dual threats because they run relatively well, but they're not that great of a passer. But just because you can pass the ball below average and that you can kind of run a little bit doesn't make you a true dual threat. I think this is a quarterback who has shown before that he is a true dual threat and can evolve further into one. So I think what it's going to come down to for him, though, is consistency and decision making. I mean, he needs to perform at a consistent level, game in and game out, regardless of what the competition is. I think we saw kind of some varied numbers against certain levels of competition. That was kind of a weird stat that people were looking into, is why was Sam Hartman performing well against some competition as opposed to other competition. So especially down that back half of the season is something to really look at. But I think just cleaning up the touchdown to interception ratio, especially down the stretch, is going to be a big deal for him. And then just overall becoming a better decision maker. I think it kind of came down just to that mental aspect with some of those mistakes that really killed him there.
For his pros and cons and all the things he can work on and the good things he does already do, where do you feel he ranks among the nation's quarterbacks going into the season?
He's a little bit of a wild card. I've personally seen him all over the place. I have him at number 10 for now, and he's a quarterback that, depending on how well he handles those decisions, how much he cuts down on those turnovers, that's going to affect whether he rises or falls. But I think that 10's a good spot for him right now among the draft eligibles.